Jonathan Pierce, a wealthy businessman in his early 60s, had spent his life building an empire in finance. He was used to control, power, and the luxury that came with it. That night, however, control slipped from his grasp. Driving his sleek Bentley through the winding roads of West Virginia, he barely noticed the darkening sky until the first crack of thunder shook the air. Within minutes, the rain turned into a downpour, drumming against the windshield as the headlights barely cut through the mist. The road was narrow and slick with mud. Jonathan gripped the wheel tightly, but suddenly the tires skidded. The car jerked violently before sliding off the road, sinking into the soft, rain-soaked ground. He cursed under his breath, pressing his foot against the gas, but the wheels only spun uselessly. Taking a deep breath, he reached for his phone. No signal. A cold unease crept up his spine. He was stranded. Outside, the storm raged on, and the surrounding woods stretched endlessly in every direction. As he stepped out into the rain, scanning the darkness for any sign of life, he couldn't shake the eerie feeling that he wasn't alone. Then, through the sheets of rain, he saw a figure watching him from the trees. Jonathan's breath hitched as he wiped the rain from his eyes, squinting into the darkness. The figure stood motionless among the trees, just beyond the reach of his headlights. His pulse quickened. Was it a trick of the storm? A shadow cast by the tangled branches? But then it moved, a slow, deliberate step forward. Jonathan felt an irrational urge to retreat. But where? His Bentley was useless, stuck deep in the mud. He clenched his fists, forcing himself to think rationally. He was a man who had dined with senators, commanded boardrooms, built fortunes from nothing, yet now, soaked and stranded on a deserted road, he felt vulnerable in a way he hadn't in years. Then the figure spoke. "You need help, sir?" It was a boy, a teenager, maybe 14, his voice steady despite the storm raging around them. He wore a thin, oversized hoodie that clung to his frame, rainwater dripping from his dark hair. His jeans were torn at the knees, his sneakers caked in mud. Jonathan exhaled, feeling slightly foolish for his earlier fear. "Yes," he said, clearing his throat. "My car's stuck. No signal out here either." The boy nodded, stepping closer, his gaze sweeping over the Bentley with quiet calculation. "I can help," he said simply. No hesitation, no second guessing. He crouched beside the car, pressing a hand against the tire, testing the way it had sunk into the ground. "Got a jack?" Jonathan blinked, taken aback. "In the trunk." The boy walked to the back and popped it open as if he had every right to. Jonathan might have protested under normal circumstances, but something about the kid's calm confidence kept him silent. The storm continued to roar, wind howling through the trees, but the boy worked efficiently, wedging the jack into place. His hands moved with a surety Jonathan recognized, the kind that came from experience, from necessity. This wasn't some kid playing at being helpful. He knew exactly what he was doing. Jonathan stood uselessly by, watching the boy struggle against the weight of the car. Guilt prickled at him. He should be helping. He should at least be offering to pay him for this. "I appreciate this," Jonathan said finally, raising his voice over the rain. The boy gave a small, almost amused smile. "Not a problem." Minutes passed before the boy finally stepped back, wiping his hands against his wet jeans. "Try it now." Jonathan slid into the driver's seat, gripping the wheel as he pressed the gas. The tires groaned, then lurched forward. The car was free. Relief flooded him. He rolled down the window. "Listen, kid, let me give you something for—" But the boy was already walking away, disappearing into the storm. Jonathan stared after him, a strange, unsettling feeling curling in his chest. Something about this wasn't right. Who was this kid? And why did he feel like their paths hadn't crossed by chance? Jonathan sat in his Bentley, gripping the steering wheel tighter than he needed to. The wipers fought against the relentless downpour, but his eyes remained locked on the spot where the boy had vanished into the storm. Every instinct told him to drive away, to return to the comfort of his penthouse in Manhattan, where the world made sense, where life was measured in profit margins and quarterly reports. But he couldn't shake the unease creeping through his bones. Who was that kid? He could have been some local teen, just passing by. But in the middle of nowhere, in the dead of night, during a raging storm, it didn't add up. And then there was the way he carried himself, calm, self-assured, like he had done this 100 times before. Jonathan exhaled sharply. He was being ridiculous. The kid helped him, and that was that. And yet, as he pulled back onto the road, his hands still felt unsteady. He drove for another 15 miles before spotting a dimly lit gas station, a small, run-down place with a rusted sign that barely clung to its frame. He pulled up to the pump but didn't get out. Instead, he sat there, staring at the flickering neon open sign, wrestling with his thoughts. Finally, he stepped out and walked inside. The air smelled of old coffee and damp wood. Behind the counter, an older man with a weathered face and tired eyes leaned back on a creaking stool, flipping through a newspaper. Jonathan cleared his throat. "Excuse me." The man looked up, raising an eyebrow. "Something wrong?" Jonathan hesitated, suddenly feeling foolish. What exactly was he going to ask? "Hey, do you know a mysterious teenager who wanders the woods at night, fixing flat tires?" Still, he pressed on. "There was a kid out on the road back there. Helped me when my car got stuck. Maybe 13 or 14. Worn out hoodie, torn jeans, dark hair. You know him?" The man's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. He set down his newspaper. "Where'd you say this was?" "Few miles back, just off the main road." A long silence stretched between them. The wind howled against the building, rattling the windows. Then, the old man exhaled slowly, shaking his head. "Son, if you saw a boy like that tonight, you weren't the first." Jonathan frowned. "What do you mean?" The man tapped his fingers against the counter, as if choosing his words carefully. "There was a kid like that years ago. Lived with his mother not far from here. Always helping folks who broke down on that stretch of road." Jonathan felt his skin prickle. "And," the man's gaze locked onto his, "died in an accident. Same road. Nearly 15 years ago." A chill ran down Jonathan's spine. He opened his mouth to argue, to insist that he had just seen the boy, that he had spoken to him, that his hands were real, his voice steady. But no words came. Jonathan gripped the edge of the counter, his knuckles turning white. The old man's words echoed in his head. Died in an accident. Same road. 15 years ago. That couldn't be right. He had seen the boy, spoken to him, felt the rough fabric of his hoodie when he patted him on the shoulder. The wrench in his hands had been solid. The tire iron clanking against the pavement had been real. There had to be another explanation, but a cold weight settled in Jonathan's stomach, a feeling he hadn't known in years. Fear. His throat dry, he forced himself to speak. "That's impossible. He was just there. He changed my tire." The old man exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face like he had heard this before. "Son, I don't know what to tell you, but if that boy helped you, then you ought to count yourself lucky." Jonathan shook his head, backing away. This was absurd. It had to be some kind of joke. Maybe he was tired. Maybe the storm had messed with his head. He needed to clear his mind. He hurried out of the gas station, rain soaking into his shirt as he climbed into his car. The moment he shut the door, silence surrounded him. Too thick, too absolute, like the world itself was holding its breath. His reflection in the rearview mirror stared back, wide-eyed and pale. His pulse pounded in his ears. He needed answers. With trembling fingers, he pulled out his phone and searched for accidents on that stretch of road. The weak signal struggled against the storm, but finally an article loaded. Local teenager killed in tragic roadside accident. 15 years later, community still remembers. Jonathan's breath hitched. He clicked on the article, his eyes scanning the words frantically. The name leapt out at him. Elijah Carter, age 14. His stomach twisted. It was him. The photo, a grainy black and white image, showed the same boy. The determined eyes, the quiet confidence. The same face that had looked up at him in the rain just an hour ago. His vision blurred as he read on. Elijah had been known for helping stranded drivers along that road, always eager to lend a hand. One night, while assisting a motorist, a truck skidded on the wet pavement, veering off course. Elijah hadn't made it. Jonathan squeezed his eyes shut. For years, people had reported seeing him, a fleeting figure in the storm, a helpful hand when no one else was around, a spirit, a presence lingering, not out of vengeance or unrest, but out of duty. Jonathan's hands trembled as he set the phone down. His entire life had been built on logic, on numbers, on control, but nothing in his world had prepared him for this. Slowly, he glanced in the rearview mirror again. For the briefest moment, just a flicker, he could swear he saw movement in the back seat, a shadow, a knowing smile. And then, just like that, it was gone. Jonathan sat in his car, gripping the wheel, his mind racing. The storm had passed, but the chill in his bones remained. The article's words haunted him. Elijah Carter, the boy who never stopped helping. How could he explain what had happened? How could he rationalize the impossible? His gaze drifted to the road ahead, the very stretch of asphalt where it all began. He thought of Elijah's steady hands, his quiet determination, the way he had refused a reward. A boy who had died 15 years ago, but still, somehow, had been there. Jonathan inhaled sharply and turned the key in the ignition. The engine rumbled to life, but he didn't drive off immediately. Instead, he looked into the rearview mirror one last time, half expecting, half hoping to see that familiar face. But there was nothing. Yet as he pulled onto the highway, a strange sense of peace settled over him. He hadn't just encountered something supernatural. He had been helped by something greater than himself. And as the road stretched before him, he knew one thing for certain. He wouldn't forget Elijah Carter, and he wouldn't ignore the lesson he had been given. Some debts weren't meant to be repaid with money. Some were meant to be honored by passing kindness forward. The story of Jonathan and Elijah reminds us that true kindness transcends time, logic, and even our understanding of reality. In a world often driven by transactions and self-interest, Elijah's selfless act teaches us that helping others isn't about rewards. It's about doing what's right simply because we can. This lesson is especially relevant today, where people are often too busy or hesitant to extend a helping hand. But small gestures, offering assistance, showing empathy, or even just listening, can create ripples far beyond what we can see. Elijah's presence, whether real or supernatural, symbolizes the impact of selflessness. His story urges us to shift our focus from personal gain to human connection. We may never know the true extent of our kindness, but that doesn't mean it doesn't matter. Sometimes the most meaningful moments in life come not from what we receive, but from what we give. Thank you for watching the video. Please comment number 1 to let us know that you have watched the whole video. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel to support us. Thank you very much.